Today's program in our series A Year's Journey is called Cheese from the Dales. The program's introduced by Eric Sims.
Hello. We're still in the northeast of England, Yorkshire this week, and if you happen to live in these parts, perhaps you've managed to visit the ruins of one of those famous abbeys I talked about last time. This is Jervaulx Abbey, and there's a very special connection between this and the subject of today's program, cheese from the Dales. Jervaulx, you see, is at the end of Wensleydale, just here on the map, and Wensleydale cheese is famous everywhere. The secret of making Wensleydale cheese was first brought to England by the Flemish monks who settled at Jervaulx. They were very famous sheep farmers, and if you're wondering what sheep have to do with cheese, well, the answer is that in those days, cheese was made not from cow's milk, as it is today, but from the milk of ewes. Each evening during the summer months, the sheep would be rounded up into a fold, away from their lambs, and the following morning the ewes would be milked by hand, each ewe giving about a pint of milk. And this milk was set to a junket with rennet, and the curds were separated from the whey and made into cheese. Nowadays, the milk comes from cows, not sheep, but the cheese is made in the same way. Do you ever have junket to eat? It's very easy to make. The milk must be slightly warm, just blood heat. A few drops of rennet. In the old days, they used to use a small piece of the dried lining of the calf's stomach. Then the milk is left to set, and after an hour or two, there's your junket. It looks just like a jelly, but when you cut it with a spoon, you separate the solid part, the curd, from the liquid part, the whey. Well, it's the curd part that's made into cheese. And what gives Wensleydale cheese its special flavour is Wensleydale itself, the pasture of the hills and valleys. But this is very slightly different from all other pastures because of the minerals found in the soil. And these minerals, of course, come from the rocks beneath the soil. Not very far beneath in many places. So before we visit the factory where the cheese is made, let's spend a few minutes in Wensleydale itself, one of the most beautiful of all the Yorkshire dales. The limestone rock is there for the quarrying and is the natural building material for the district. Millions of years ago, all this high countryside lay beneath the sea, and the limestone was deposited in layers of soft mud which gradually hardened into solid rock. But now the rushing waters of the River Ure are wearing the rocks away again. One of the commonest sounds up here is the call of the curlew. The mate of this one is flying around not very far away. This is a young one, not yet able to fly, so one parent or the other is usually somewhere close at hand. The true dalesman, like this farmer who's lived in Wensleydale all his life, knows a great deal about the habits of the wild creatures round about him. He knows where to look for this little fellow, for example. A dog? No, much smaller than that. It's an animal that spends most of its life tunneling underground, cut off completely from the outside world. Christopher knows what it is. And so do you. It's a mole, and a pretty lively one at that. Many of the people of these remote fells still speak the old Wensleydale dialect, which is quite different from the speech of other parts of the country. See how much you can understand of our farmer talking about the fells he loved to climb when he was a boy.
When I was nobbut a lad, I oft set off it morning with a snack in my pocket to spend day up on fells. There's some fine views when you get out on top, but it's a long climb up. It can be very cold and all, especially if you get caught in a sudden patch of thunder rain. By gum, it can rain in these parts, but rain's good for pasture land, and that's good for sheep and deers. Farther down valley, there are all hedges with fine blaeberries growing in them at back end, and thorn trees with cattars on, and rose bushes with red tubes. Up here, we've naught but stone walls to steer the hedges. I built this to warm myself when I was a young fella. It's as good as it was 40 years then. I was always a handy sort of a chap while stains come in.
How much of that Wensleydale dialect did you understand? I expect some of the words are strange to you. Chooks and cat-haws, for example. You'd probably call them hips and haws. Well, our farmer is now rounding up the cows for milking. They're dairy shorthorns, by the way, for this farm is nearly 1,000 feet above sea level. And the Frisian cattle on so many of the lower farms in the valley wouldn't be hardy enough up here. And this, of course, brings us to the main part of our program. For practically all the milk from these small hill farms comes to the factory where the famous Wensleydale cheese is made. From each farm is weighed separately so that the farmer can be paid. And then the milk is run into the sterilizing machine, which heats it to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This kills any microbes that might sour the milk and spoil the cheese. It's cooled again to 90 degrees Fahrenheit and run into the big vats where the cheese is made. As each vat fills up, some starter is added. This contains the very special microbes that will give the cheese its right flavor. You see how the stirrer moves along the vat and back again? That's the last of the 4 vats now underway. In the next one, the starter has been at work for an hour and a half. And now the temperature of the milk is taken before the rennet is added. 86 degrees is the right temperature. If it gets any higher, the steam which heats the vat must be turned off. That's the rennet in that jug. For every 100 gallons of milk, only 2 ounces of rennet are needed to turn it into junket. It's stirred for a few minutes, then allowed to sit. The junket in the next vat is ready to be cut. The knives are started up again, and the junket is broken up into solid curd and watery whey. In the last of the 4 vats, that's the one that was filled up first this morning, the whey is being run off, and the curd left in the tank has to be cut up into blocks with a large knife. This cutting must be done at exactly the right stage in the cheese making. The blocks of cheese at this stage look rather like blocks of bouncy foam rubber. All the time, the whey is draining away through that hole at the end of the vat and along a pipe into a huge tank. Meanwhile, the cheese has been cut and turned again. And now, the right amount of salt must be added. Two sizes of cheese are made in this factory. The little 1-pound cheeses are made in these small molds. What's this for? As each tray of molds is completed, it's taken away to the cheese press. A little wooden disc is placed on the top of each mold, and when the press is full, the pile of trays is squeezed down by a large screw. The cheeses will remain in the presses all night. Here are some of the 12-pound cheeses in their presses. You can see the last bit of whey running out of the molds. Next morning, the cheeses are removed from their molds. This big one is having a special cotton bandage pasted on to protect it. Some of the cheeses are put into plastic bags instead of being bandaged. All the air must be sucked out of each bag with this vacuum pump. The cheese will then keep fresh for a very long time. The cheeses in their plastic bags are finally scalded in hot water to shrink the plastic close to the cheese. And here are the cheeses waiting to be sent off to the customers. Big ones and little ones. And now, what about that whey? It still contains quite a lot of cream which settles on top. This cream will be made into butter. The butter churn is very like those used by the farmers' wives in the old days, except that they had to turn theirs by hand. This one is worked by electric power. It takes some hours for the cream to change into butter. About the last lot is being blended with just the right amount of salt. Have to be moistened now and then with water to prevent them sticking to the butter. And now watch how the blended butter is made up into half-pound tubs. Even with the cream removed, the whey still contains a large amount of nourishment, but nourishment for what? Well, there's the answer. The whey feeds the pigs, and the pigs will be turned into bacon to feed some of us. Bacon, butter, and cheese. 3 products, all from the milk of Wensleydale. What's milk used for in your part of the world? Is it sold as liquid milk, or is some of it turned into butter and cheese? Wensleydale isn't the only part of England famous for its cheeses. Look at this chart. There's Lancashire cheese from Lancashire, Cheshire cheese from Cheshire, Derby, Leicester, Gloucester. I wonder if there's a special kind of cheese for your particular county. Anyway, what I want you to do before next week is this. Go and look at your local grocer's and see how many kinds of cheese he stocks. Perhaps you can arrange between yourselves to bring small pieces of some of them to school and arrange a kind of tasting competition. Which ones do you particularly like and why? And if you're able to try this one, think of the film you've seen today and try to remember exactly how Wensleydale cheese is made. Goodbye until next time.